So good to see everybody again. We haven't done this in a while, but we have a great show tonight. I want to introduce our panelists first, and then we'll get to our guest, Matt Carniato. How are you?
I'm good, and you, Bonnie? How are
I'm
things
good.
going?
I'm good. And I just saw
Glad.
Connie jump into the chat. So yeah, I think we started 30 minutes early. I think I did that. I think I accidentally set it up for the wrong time. But Connie's here, so it's fine. We're gonna rock and roll. Uh, I'm glad you're here, Matt. And so I have to thank you, Matt, for setting up this guest for us because you actually brought him to me. I had not met our guest tonight. So thank you for that. So actually, maybe you should introduce our guest.
Yeah. Our guest today is a member of the NGXS core team. He's the biggest contributor on NGXS on plugins. This guy has the best plugins on NGXS. They are amazing. Check it out. And yeah, so Joaquin, the stage is yours.
Welcome,
Hey,
Joaquin.
well, I'm very glad. Thank you, thank you. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you, Moni, for your invitation. And yeah, so I've been part of the NGXS core team. A few months ago, I started, making some contributions on the docs and with a plugin called Actions Executing. And the plugin, the last plugin I wrote with the help of Mark Whitfield, which is the lead of the NGXS team, is the Firestore plugin, which is the one that we're going to talk about today. So very glad to
All
to
right.
be to be doing this.
That's awesome. Okay, so you want to share your screen and
Sure.
dive right in?
Okay. Yep. Okay, so as he said, I'm part of the NGXS core team. I'm a full stack developer. I'm from Argentina, and I'm currently living in Buenos Aires. And today I'm going to talk a plugin called NGXS Firestore plugin, which brings together NGXS and Firestore. It allows to easily manage and integrate Firestore database with the NGXS store. Also, since you have your Firestore data in the store, it makes it easier to join and merge it with the data from other origins, such as REST API data or even transient data that we keep in the store. So before we start, I'll quickly go over the main features of Firestore and NGXS. Then we'll take a look at some basic examples and how the plugin works. And finally, if we have time, we'll take a look at the more complete example demo. So in case you have any questions as I'm going through the presentation, just stop me and be my guest to make your questions.
And I'm watching the chat, so you can ask questions in the chat, and then I can jump in and we should have. So Joaquin, your talk is not too long, so we should have time for questions if they want to jump in. Otherwise, we can always have time for questions at the end too.
Okay, cool. Okay, so Firestores, for those who are not familiar with, it's a real-time NoSQL database. And one of its main advantages is that it's very easy to start working with. It's designed for performance, which means queries are super fast. It also means you have certain limitations. For instance, queries not support certain filtering capabilities, and joins are not supported. Data is organized in collections and documents, and you can fetch data from the database with a query. Once connected, you start listening to updates on that collection or document as they happen, meaning you get a stream of changes on the query that you are connected to. Firestore is most commonly used on mobile apps and web apps too. It provides a local first approach. This means that it fetches data from and writes data to the local device first, and then tries to sync with the database in the background. This is why it also provides offline support. Firestore also comes with a very neat JavaScript SDK. And for Angular apps, there's an official Angular Fire library that provides a nice API that fits very well with Angular development model. Okay, so NGXS is a reactive state management library. Between its main advantages, we can find it requires less code to get started. It has an easier model to grasp. It allows async actions, so no need for effects for those who are familiar with NGRX. And it's plugin based. So that means that it has a core API and you can extend its functionality via plugins. For instance, the one we're going to talk about today. It follows CQRS pattern, and in certain ways similar to Redux. You basically have a store where you keep the app data. You have actions which you can dispatch and update data in the store in an immutable way. And finally, you have components that select which data they need to use and receive updates as they happen in the store. I'm not going to go over the details of a complete implementation, but I wanted to at least give you some quick general idea of what the NGXS model looks like. Okay, so let's start taking a look at some code examples from the most basic way of connecting to Firestore, and then upgrading it to use NGXS, and finally use the plugin. First, let's take a look at how to use the plain Angular Fire library to fetch data in an Angular app. Again, I'm not going to go over the complete implementation, and instead go over the most important pieces of code so we can understand how it works. So here we have a component class in which we inject the Angular Firestore dependency, which is part of the Angular Fire library. It's basically a service to run operations against Firestore. Then we have a user's dollar property, which we set with the value changes on the user's collections. Quick note here, Firestore is organized in collections, and collections contains documents. When you query using Firestore library, use the collection path you want to get the documents from, or the document path. So what we're doing here is getting all the documents from the collection in the user's path. Another thing to notice here is that value changes will return an observable with an array of the documents of that collection. So now that we have our observable in the template, we would pipe async it in the component template, and here's what the result would look like. So we can see that initially the value is null. That means that there's no data. And once Angular Firestore receives the result from the collection, it will display it on the component. So an important thing here is that since this is an observable and Firestore is a real-time database, any change that happens on the collections while we're connected would be streamed into the component. So any document that is added or any change on any property of any document will be displayed on the document as long as we're connected to that query. Okay. So now I'm going to move on and implement the same example, but using NGXS without the Firestore plugin. So in this case, again, we have a component class, and instead of injecting the Angular Firestore library, we are injecting the store. Here we can see that we have two steps to fetch data from Firestore. Initially, we dispatch the action to get all users. We'll see what that action executes later. And then, similarly to the previous example, we have a user's dollar property where we select the users from the store. The select method also returns an observable that will emit every time the store has changed on the user's selector. Okay, so what we have here is the user state. So NGXS states is where we define the data model we're going to store, and also where we keep the behavior of the actions and how they mutate the data in the store. And also we have the selectors, like the slices of data that we are going to expose to the components. So first, we're going to define the selector for the users. We can see that we're returning the user's property from this state. Then we have the get all users action. If we recall from the beginning, NGXS allows async actions. So what we'll do here is return the same observable we had in the previous example using the Angular Firestore service, pipe it, and then we're going to patch the state with the results that we received. We return that observable because NGXS will later take care of subscribing to it. So we can see that the query is almost the same as the previous example, but we have one difference, which is this take one operator. The reason we include this is that if we don't, the action would never complete, because Angular Firestore returns an observable that won't complete until you unsubscribe from it. So the main difference here is that we're just going to grab the first emission of the Firestore collection query, and therefore we will lose the real-time feature. Now, if we go how this would look like, we can see that it's almost the same, and instead of starting with a null, it starts with an empty array, because we use that as the initial value in the store. But other than that, it's the same. Once the component is initiated, the get all users is dispatched. And when Firestore emits the results, we patch the store, and the results are streamed to the component through the selector. Okay, so let's take a look at what problems we have with this approach. The problem with this approach is that we don't keep an open connection to receive updates. So we're just going to get the first emission, and then we are stopping the connection. So no more stream of updates. If we wouldn't use the take one, that would allow us to get more results, the action would never end. So that would make things harder to debug and harder to understand how things are working in the store. Another problem is that every time we dispatch the action, the query will get executed, and that's not ideal because Firebase charges us on a per read basis. So we want to avoid that behavior. We could potentially achieve streaming capabilities with NGXS, but it would involve a lot of code that we would have to write in every state that we are using in our app. So after taking a look at all this, we came up with a list of requirements, and here's what we thought when we were talking about building this with Mark. So first, an idea of connecting to a query, where you create a connection to listen to Firestore database updates. Separate the stream connection with the stream emission. Create a specific synchronous hook to receive each result and update the store. Keep track of which connections are active on the app. So one query will be one connection, so we want to know how many active queries we have on the app at all times. Control when we want to connect or disconnect to a query, and control not requiring the same query if we are already connected, in order to avoid that getting charged to read the same data that we already have in the app. Okay, so now let's take a look at how we can perform this same example, but now using the NGXS Firestore plugin. And we can see the advantages of using it. So here we have a diagram where we can see where the plugin fits in the NGXS library model. So if we recall from the first slides, actions are dispatched from components. Actions then mutate data in the store, and components select data from store and get updates as data changes. With Firestore plugin, what will happen is that we'll set up a connection between a query and an action. This setup will happen in the state initialization, as we'll see later. So once the connection is set up, when we dispatch the action, we will execute the query and start getting its results. On every emission from the query, a special action will get dispatched, and is called the stream emitted of that action. In this hook, we'll get the results emitted from the query, and we'll be able to update the state as we see fit. So now what we'll have in the code instead is, first of all, we'll inject a new dependency, which is the ng Firestore Connect dependency, which is part of the plugin library. We'll also implement the NGXS onInit lifecycle hook, which gets executed right after NGXS has bootstrapped. And this lifecycle will set up the connection I talked about before. We can see that the connection involves two pieces. On one hand, the action that will get connected, and on the other hand, the query here on the two parameter that it will be connected to. So the stream emitted action, it's almost the same to any other NGXS action. You get the context, but instead of receiving the dispatched action, you get a payload of type emitted, which will contain two properties: the action that was dispatched and the payload result from the query that you were connected to. And then within the action, we can update the store as we need. A couple of things here. So the plugin will handle the subscription to the query for us and keep it alive. That's what will happen here. And now the immediate action becomes synchronous because we don't need to handle the observable anymore. That's been handled on the connection for us. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a look at how this all gets executed and the order in which this will happen. So the connection part will not show up in the logs. It's going to be transparent for us. It's just the setup code that will be run once in the app lifecycle and will be connected during all the app lifetime. The first thing that will happen is that the get all users NGXS Firestore action is going to get executed. And only at that point, the query is going to be executed. Then it's going to get connected. I'm going to talk about this later, but basically the plugin provides a couple of extra hooks than just the immediate one that allows you to set up some custom behavior if you need. Then it emits, and here's when we will receive the results from the database. And at that point is where we call the initial dispatch action, this one, as completed. And we'll talk about a bit more about this later. So a couple of more things, nice features that the plugin also comes with to make things a bit easier to start. It's the NGXS Firestore Service. It's a generic service that will make easy to perform the most common operations with Firestore. For example, the CRUD operations like create, read, update, and delete. Basically, it's a base class that you will extend from, and you just need to set the path on the collection that this service is going to work on, which in this case would be, for example, users. And if we go back to the example we had before, we can see that instead of using the Angular Firestore service that we had, we inject that user Firestore that we created in the previous slide, and we just call the collection method. And this all provides the same behavior than the other code. It gets you an observable of all the changes on that collection. Okay, so now I'm getting close to the end of the presentation. I wanted to give you a couple of more advanced topics or configurations that the plugin allows. So one of the ways that you can set up the connection is to use track by, and that will control having the identity of an action. So by default, you can only have one instance of a query active, and that is tracked by the action name. So we can use track by to set up a unique ID for different dispatches and keep all those connections alive. That's helpful, and we'll see it on the demo later. If we want to get, for example, a document with a specific ID, and we want to call multiple times with different IDs, and we want to keep all those connections alive. Another option we have is the connected action finishes on. And this controls when the action is going to be completed. By default, it's on first emit, and it's what we saw on the logs that I showed before. And stream completed instead will complete once the action or the query actually finishes. Cancel previous is to disconnect a connected previous action when you dispatch the same action. That it's kind of similar to idea as switch map, if you're familiar with RxJS. Okay, and the other thing I wanted to talk about was about the life cycle that I kind of quickly went through when we talked about the example. And basically, the plugin has a couple of life cycle hooks that you can subscribe or you can hook into, and that's the stream connected. That's when you get the first result of a query. The stream emitted, that will be the first and all the subsequent results that a Firestore query will emit. The stream disconnected, because you can also disconnect from a query to stop listening if you want to. And stream error, if for some reason there's an error and you want to do a specific behavior, you can hook onto that event as well. So yeah, so that's pretty much the presentation. I don't know if you guys have any questions at this. I didn't stop while I was going through, but yeah, let me know if, because the next thing I have to show is the demo, and if you want to ask questions, we can also do it while we show the demo.
I have questions. I have a couple comments that I just want to throw in there. And also, if you guys watching have any questions, then throw them in the chat, and we'll get to them before the demo. So I just wanted to throw out, because when I first saw the selector, can you go back in the slide to the selector to the beginning?
Yes.
Do Do you have that? When I first saw this, I was super confused because I was working with Austin when he was writing this, and I didn't know what a selector was. But I thought this was really cool because so the selector basically means you can get anything that you want from the state at any time and just pass in like an ID or whatever and get what you want. I think that's really cool. Also, so you talked a little bit about the CRUD services with the connection, which I also think is very cool. So, and this is something also that I talk to developers a lot with GraphQL, because I think sometimes like I didn't really understand the first time I heard something like this. I think it was with Hasura, but the concept of like, if you're writing CRUD services at this point, which is the create, read, update, delete, which we all do, right? And I think every single app has to have these CRUD services. And I've seen more and more open source teams that are extracting that because we don't want to do that anymore. So I think that was a really cool thing that I just wanted to highlight, was that connection, so that you don't have to write those CRUD services. But I'm curious, and you might have said this, but I might have missed it. Can you still do something like that if you're not using Firestore? Like, what if you have like an on-prem database or something like that? Can you still get those CRUD services, or is that only with the Firestore?
So yeah, the plugin is mostly based for Firestore. So basically, and I can show you let me go to the stacklets. And so this service, the NGX Firestore service, it's there to make things simpler. You can write your own service if you want, but yeah, in this case, it's mostly thought for Firestore. One thing that it's also true is that this plugin, or actually the query, when you connect NGXS Firestore Connect an action with a query, that what you need to return is an observable. So that means that you could potentially return whatever thing that you want, as long as it's an observable. That means that you could connect to any observable that you have available. In this case, this was mostly aimed for again for Firestore. So that's kind of the way and all the code is written for. So, but yeah, so basically, once you have the connection set up here, what happens is that when you dispatch this action, this query gets executed. And every time, so what happens is that Firestore will start emitting the results as they occur. So you'll first get the first result, and then you get all the subsequent emissions if there are changes on the server, right? So the first and all the other emissions are going to be tracked in this action here, and you can see that it's this stream emitting of an action. And here's where we would get the result from the Firestore query.
Is this StackBlitz public? Can we share this?
Yeah,
with the people watching?
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
If you put a link in the StreamYard chat, I can copy it over to the YouTube so everybody can have it.
Yeah. There you go.
I remember when I was first learning RxJS and I was struggling to figure this stuff out. And I remember the reason why I love Firebase so much is because it was so easy. Like the docs were like so good. And some of the stuff, especially for beginners when you're learning, like if there's anything wrong in the docs or anything that's not explained, it's really easy to get stuck. And I never got stuck with Firebase because the docs were so good. And same thing with NGXS. I think the docs are really, I mean, maybe I'm biased, but I think good documentation is so important.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so the plugin has its own GitHub repository. I try to keep the documentation up to date whenever we make changes. And there are a few examples so that you can easily start working with. And yeah, so also about Firestore Service, So this is like kind of a base class that you will extend from. And so you get
Can you make this a little bigger, Joaquin?
Yeah, all the base class. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's better.
Okay. And so you can see that when we use this user's Firestore service now, you get the collection, which brings everything. You can also query. And yes, of course, if you're familiar with Angular Fire library, you will understand this easily. But basically, you can say this would be the field, and you can say equals to, I don't know, 14. And so you can write your own query with the same with this same method, and this makes things a bit easier. Also, for example, if you want to create an action that creates a document, for example, in that collection, in that user's collection, you could do, you wouldn't do it here, but you can see that you have all these. These are all the methods that the service comes with. You have an update, upsert, you have create, and you can look for a specific document in that collection. You send the ID here, like this, and you say like, I don't know, ID 1, and this is going to get the document on that user's collection with ID 1. So it makes things easier. It's things that once you start working with Firestore, you have to do it all over the place. So keeping things like simpler and more accessible, it's better when you have to do things like this in several parts of an application. And yeah, so the other thing I wanted to share here is this example. Let me open it here. So this comes with the examples that I talked in the presentation, but it also comes with this chats example. So for example, in this case, we can see that there are two, actually I'm going to bring up. Okay, so we can see that we have the chats collection, and then we have the private document and the public document, right? And within each of these documents, we have a field called messages, where we are going to store all the messages. So if I go and click on public, I'm going to see all the messages that happen on that chat. I can write my own message here. And one of the neat things that the plugin comes with, and this is what I wanted to share with you, is you can see which connections you have open on the application. So we can see that we have the chats get with ID public. We also have the chats get all, which is the one that we use to list all the documents in the chats collection. And if I go and click on private, we can see that we will have the chats get private and chats get public. And we can see that that is done here. So here's where we have set up those connections. First, we set up the get all chats, and we connected to give me all the documents in a collection. And then we can separately called the get chat. And in that case, we're going to receive an ID, dispatch this action. And with that, we're going to hook into the document with that. In this case, it's going to be the chat with that ID. And we can see here that we're tracking it by the payload, which is the ID. If we wouldn't do this, what would happen is that we would only keep the last connection only. So if we would do public and then private, the public would get disconnected. We would stop for updates, and we would just get the one that we clicked on the second later. So
and sometimes this is what you want, right? Because if you have different chat rooms, you just want to be connected to the one that you're actually seeing.
Exactly.
So sometimes you really want to keep just the latest connection alive.
Yep. Yeah, so you can, it's pretty flexible, the plugin. It allows some configurations that allows you to set up for different scenarios. So where you want to keep just one active connection, or when you want to keep different active connections based on IDs. Another important thing here is that, for example, in this case, the get all chats, it's executed every time the application loads, right? So once that connection has been connected and you're getting the results for that, if you for some reason dispatch again that action, the plugin will know that you're already connected and will not do anything for you. So that's very nice because you don't have to reread the documents from Firestore. The plugin, it's smart to know which, using that track by method, is going to know which ones are the ones that you're already connected to. And that means that for some reason, especially when you're working on single page applications, that sometimes you go from one page to another and you navigate through different routes. But Firestore, it's nice because you can create a query, leave that open and connected, have that data on the store, and when you come back, you don't need to reload the data because the data it's already there. And if it has updated while you were doing something else on another route, when you come back, it's going to be up to date. And that makes things super reactive because you're not only reactive with NGXS, you're also reactive using the real-time database. And you have all that stream is all the way through from the server to the component and back to the server again.
And it's not that much code.
Yep. Or
Beautiful.
it's less code than if you have to do it like for every state. Actually, that's how this started, right? I did it like a proof of concept on one state, and I had to write a lot of code in order to get it working. And through some iterations with Mark, this is kind of what we came up with. And we think that, it makes things, it's intuitive, enough intuitive, and it's also as simple as you can do it to regard the less code that to get this working.
It's very cool. Okay, I was wondering about something, but I wasn't sure if it was off topic or if it's like a whole tangent. But then somebody asked in the chat, so now it's not my fault, it's Darius's fault because it was a really good question. Do you have time for a question?
Yep.
Are unit test examples, any unit test examples for Firestore and NGRX? He says NGRX, but I think he means NGXS. Do you have any unit tests for this? Are they easy to mock? I was wondering about that too. How would you test this? Because this is the thing, if you're like, you don't want to put like fake data in Firebase, right? So I remember I've dealt with this before with Firebase, but I don't remember how I handled it. I've slept since then. Right.
So, I mean, what you should do, so you wouldn't test the connection itself. That's kind of the plugin already has tests for that. So you shouldn't need to perform tests on this. If you would want to, you would have to, for example, in this case, you could create a mock of the chats Firestore and make the collection dollar method to return an observable and see what that emits and that happens. So when you create a mock on that, this action is going to get executed, and that would, make, you would see how the application.
Do you know if there's any kind of example out there like that? Is there
No,
one?
no.
Maybe you could make us one in your free time if we're nice to you.
Yeah. The next thing I was going to say, that another way to also test this is that you could dispatch this action, this stream emitted action, and that would be even easier because you would just
in your test.
Exactly, and that would get a payload, and you can set up your data and see what happens after that. Because it all depends on what you want to test, and basically when you write tests, you want to try to write them, or at least the way I do them is you want to write them to try to test your functionality, not the library's functionality, because that would be responsibility of the library. But yeah.
That's awesome.
I have another question. Is possible to disconnect, let's say, because I know I use Firebase for some of my clients, and it's very tricky sometimes when you're dealing with budget and you really don't want to overuse Firebase if you don't need to. Is it possible to disconnect? Let's say I don't need this connection anymore. I move to another page and there's no reason to be watching on this. I want to save some processing and also bandwidth. And
right. So so let me quickly talk about this here. So when we're using the Angular Firestore service, which is the one that the library Angular has, you get an observable with these value changes, and you subscribe to it using, almost all the times, you would subscribe to it using the pipe async. You can do it in the component as well. You would have to remember to unsubscribe from it in ng on destroy event. But basically what will happen is that using this pipe async, you will be disconnected as well, and you will stop listening for updates when the component is destroyed. So when we're working with this plugin, that's not the case. What happens is that you dispatch the action, and at that point you start the query. And once you start it, it's going to be alive until you finish it or disconnect it. You can disconnect from a query, and you can do this for dispatch. And here you tell them which one you want to disconnect from. And with this by dispatching this action, you stop listening for updates. And when you dispatch it again, it will start again. So you can control when you want to start listening and when you want to stop. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thanks, Joaquin.
No. So
Darius said he's very sorry that he called it NGRX. He meant NGXS. I said we have enough love for all the libs. I love this chat room example because it's just such a good thing for a demo to show this real time functionality. I think it's clever.
Yeah, actually, I was going to see if you want to connect money, and I know it might not work, but we can see if your messages come up as well.
I'm doing it.
So yeah, because that way we can demo that the connection is alive, and all the changes that happen on the server are streamed down to the component. So, and that's like fully reactive.
I just have to go to the Stack Blitz, right? And go to the chats?
Yep.
To the public chat?
Yeah. I think you'll need to log in.
I'm doing it.
Yeah, there you go.
So basically because I put this in, so anybody who's watching can also log in and chat with us. Just
Yep.
Be nice. Don't say anything bad because we're live streaming. So make sure you're like PG-13. But if you guys are in the chat, you can check that link and then just put in your name and put in say hello and behave yourselves, y'all. This is cool. This is fun. I like it.
Yeah.
I have a bit more tricky question.
Oh no.
Yeah, like Bonnie told me like, hey Matt, can you jump in and just like break
heckle him
like a little bit? Yeah,
we can't let it go too easily for Joaquin.
Yeah, and what can I use this with because I know that NGXS handles very well lazy loaded states. Can I use this with a lazy loaded state?
Yes. So it's the same. I mean, this will
too easy, drill sergeant. Too easy.
Yeah, it was the best I got. He didn't even
no,
think
Matt.
about
We talked about this before the show. You were supposed to argue with him. You were supposed to tell him this is wrong, and yeah. We're just
so basically. The plugin works on top of NGXS. So if you're using lazy loaded states and you use the connection on that lazy loaded state, that will be executed once the lazy loaded state is loaded. But yeah, it's going to work. It's going to work later, I guess.
Love it.
And then I have to declare your plugin in my root NGXS model, right?
Yeah. So I didn't talk about that because I wanted to go to the connection part and kind of the concept of having a connection that doesn't start the query until you dispatch it. That's kind of the main thing that the plugin does. But yeah, in terms of setup, basically. Whenever you have Firestore in your application, what you'll have is you'll have a Angular Fire module with a config, and you have to import the Angular Firestore module. And then what we can see here is that we have NGXS. This is standard NGXS. And then we include the NGXS Firestore module for root. And that's kind of where that handles the subscription of the connections and all that. Yeah, so that's all you need to get going.
That's beautiful. That's an awesome demo. Okay, I have two more questions. Was there anything else that you wanted to show us first?
No. I'm good.
Okay. I'm gonna take this screen share down for a minute. We'll just chat for a minute. We're almost at the top of the hour, but just a couple. Okay, so first question. You can be honest with us. Tell us, is it true that Mark is really mean to y'all? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I say that because Mark is like the sweetest guy in the world, so I'm just being silly. But actually, okay, so serious question. I know he's not mean to you guys. Serious question. Is there anything that you can tell us officially, unofficially? Can you give us like a sneak peek of what is on the roadmap for NGXS? Do you have any unauthorized little hints for us? What are you guys working on? What are you guys talking about? Like, is there any functionality that you're thinking about that you haven't had time to implement yet?
Do you want to go?
See, now Mark's going to kill us. He's going to be like, hey, this was not part of the show.
I actually think this is a wonderful opportunity. I'm going to talk about two, but then you can talk about one that you are actually working, Joaquin, that I'm very excited to start using as soon as possible. So right now we have some state helpers to auto-create for you some selectors. So instead of having to create the same selectors that you always need to create for your state, you can use some helpers. For now, it's a gist, so we're getting feedback from the community. I can give you the link later, Bonnie, of the gist, so people can also comment on the issue. And Mark is planning to work full-time for open source in December to push out of the window local state management in NGXS. So everybody's very excited about this feature. He has a very good idea. So yeah, we also, this is a bit more of a caveat. We also migrating to NX, our monorepo. So very soon, everything's going to be built inside NX monorepo. And you can talk about yours, Joaquin, which is the nicest one, actually.
Don't forget the
so yeah. One thing to add to what Matt was saying is that Mark, as part of the full month he's going to spend on work on NGXS, he is also looking for support from companies that use the NGXS or individuals. So if you want to help him during that time, he will really appreciate. We will all really appreciate that. And so I guess that we can share the tweet where he gives that information later. But yeah, so one of the things that we are talking about in the NGXS meetings is a plugin to also provide, so the same way that we have hooks to when the stream has submitted, so you can get the result and just work with the data that has come from a query, to create hooks for specific events of an action lifecycle. So as I said earlier, NGXS allows async actions. That means that you can work with promises, you can work with observables. You don't need effects to do that. And one of the things that that has you have a life cycle. The action has a life cycle. So it is dispatched, and then it would either be successful or error, and in both cases it's going to be completed. So basically, one of the things that we're seeing is that sometimes you want to create hooks when an action has succeeded or an action has errored, for example. For example, if you've got an error, you want to display, you want to set some error message or whatever in a state. And this is going to allow you to make it much, much easier, because similarly to what we have in stream immediate action, this will be like action failed of action. And that way you can patch state and do right behavior you want to perform on that particular event. So that's one of the things that
it's cool, because it's like what you were talking about with the CRUD, and the same thing with the error handling. Like, this is code we have to write anyway. So that's less code that we have to write, because I always have to do error handling and load success, load data, load error, and all that kind of stuff. So it's code that has to be there anyway. It's just we don't have to write it. I like it. All right, well that's that's a wrap. We're at the top of the hour. Is there anything else you guys want to add before we say goodbye? I just put that link to the issue there. So if you guys want to give them feedback, please do. And where should they go if they want to learn more? We have we do have the NGXS channel on Angular Nation, which is just getting started. But you guys also have a Slack too, right? That's pretty active.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And I'm assuming we could paste another link, but it's probably somewhere very easily found on the NGXS docs.
Yes.
And you guys actually hang out in that Slack and like answer people's questions, and I can personally attest that the NGXS team is super nice. So I would encourage y'all to reach out if you have questions. Except that Mark Whitfield guy. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, Mark. I'm just kidding. I'm only kidding.
We also
He's
have
really nice.
We also have some office hours at Angular Nation with the NGXS core team. So if you have questions, come. We there.
I really like the office hours because we just kind of hang out and talk, and it's super chill and it's very casual, and you can turn on your camera and you can be a beginner. You don't need to or you can just turn on your camera, hang out with us, and watch. Heckle, Joaquin, and Matt. Love it.
That's always
all
fun.
right. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show. You are always welcome here, and you should just come anytime you have cool new stuff to show us. We really love it. We love having you on the show, and y'all are great. So thank you so much, Joaquin. I mean, maybe it's just me because I've used NGXS because I was there when Austin was making it, so I'm really familiar with it. But to me, I mean, the demo seemed very very easy to follow, and I really liked it, and I really appreciate the awesome content.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. Thank you for making it so easy to use. All right, that's our show tonight. Thank you very much, and we'll see y'all soon. Bye.
See ya. Bye-bye.